Choosing to feel good is easy when we're just working on ourselves, but it gets really complicated when we have to deal with other human beings. So how can we feel okay when people around us are not? In today's episode, we're going to talk about how to feel good even when our children don't, and how to feel good when maybe our spouse is being cold, or how to feel good when we have to go to work and we have that really annoying downer coworker that we have to be around. Look, life is going to be complicated because of relationships, but relationships also make life fantastic. We've got an expert on today, Reverend Rachel Harrison, who's going to teach us how to feel great even when people around us don't. Let's rock. Welcome to the Good Mood Revolution. I'm your host, Matt O'Neill, and I've spent the last 15 years mastering the art of lasting happiness. Look, happiness isn't just a feeling, it is a skill, and it's a skill that you can learn and master. This show is your training ground. Let your Good Mood Revolution begin now. So we love to feel good all the time, and of course that's not possible. And one of the things that makes feeling good so tricky are those darn other people that happen to be in our lives, and the energy that they bring into our life sometimes affects our energy. For me, I can read and feel what someone else is feeling as soon as they walk in a room. This morning, I said, hey, Katie, I've got the kids all on my own. I said, I'm going to do this whole day on my own, and this is the first week of school. And she's like, afraid for me. And she said, I don't know if you can handle this. I can come in and give you a hand. I'm like, no. You got your things to do. I know you're swamped at work and you need some space, like get some things done. I'm going to do this. And so 6 o'clock, I'm preparing to make breakfast, and my little 6-year-old daughter comes down and she's so excited. She just lost a tooth. Unfortunately, the tooth fairy forgot to come last night. And, and so I was like, man, maybe it's because we didn't use the special tooth pillow. The tooth fairy didn't know that you actually lost that tooth. And she's like, okay, that makes sense. But so she's still super happy bouncing around, even though the tooth fairy forgot to come. And then my second daughter, Cameron, she comes down and she looks at me and she's like, you need help. I'm like, I need help, Cam. And she said, okay, I'm on it. I'm going to start by getting water bottles, and I'm going to start like getting lunches ready for all of us. And I'm like, thank you. And then my oldest daughter, she's lingering. So I've got breakfast. I'm cooking eggs, like specialty order eggs for all of them. Everybody's having so much fun. I put on Meghan Trainor radio because my youngest daughter is going to a Meghan Trainor concert as like a big surprise for her and my wife, Katie. And we are just feeling amazing. I go get my son. He's almost 3 and he's having yogurt. Everybody, like, it's just a happy, joyful morning. And then I finally go upstairs and I'm like, hey, Harper, are you going to come down? Is everything okay? And she said, yeah, I'll be there in a minute. And as she walks down the stairs, it's like a dark cloud follows her. And this happy morning, immediately her mood, just whatever she decided this morning that wasn't good. And I don't know what it was that was going through her mind. But her negative energy like sucked all the joy from the kitchen. And and she immediately, she says to sweet little Kelly, she said, you haven't even brushed your hair yet. It looks awful. And then Kelly puts her head down and I said, hey, Harper, we're all like choosing to be happy this morning, and you can make that choice too. And then of course she didn't want to hear that. And so she turned her shoulder to me, and I had made her the toast she wanted with jelly and scrambled eggs, just like she had wanted them, and had gotten her yogurt and had made a fruit smoothie. Like, I went out of my way to like have this special breakfast, and she didn't eat a single bite. And today, this is just real life. This is this morning, and this is things that we deal with. Today, we have an expert with us that can help us learn how to find our joy and recognize that we get to be okay even when people around us are not. She's a dear friend of mine at this point. Her name is Reverend Rachel Harrison. And Rachel, welcome to Good Mood Revolution.
Matt, thank you so much. You just described how I got on this journey almost to a T, except for I didn't have as many kids as you. I only had 2 kids, which was plenty of kids. And I started this whole soul recovery journey that I'm on because I remember early on, I heard somebody say, you're only as happy as your least happy child. And that made sense to me at the time. I couldn't see, I hadn't done the work that you even have done raising your kids now, which is so extraordinary. I hadn't done that. And so when I heard that, I said, yeah, that's true. You can only be as happy as your least happy child. Well, I had a really unhappy child. I had a child who came in with heaviness. I had a child who had anxiety from the start. I had a child that you couldn't leave at the daycare without him crying for the entire day, you know? And so I took it upon myself that my job, my mission in life was to make him happy. And if he could be happy, then I could be happy. And I will tell you, it didn't work out so great.
And you know what? Sometimes we do this with our significant other, right? For me, I did this with my dad. I thought if I could just make my dad happy, well, then we'd have a happy household. Impossible. Or we've got a significant other, and I had a girlfriend in my 20s that just some days were just really, really dark days for her. And I used to think, you know, if I could just figure out how to pull her out of whatever darkness she's in on those days. And it wasn't every day. It was like only, you know, 1 out of 10 days. But every 1 out of 10 days was a miserable day for the two of us. And I thought if I could just get her to be happy, then we would have this blissful life. But what I was doing when I was trying to make her happy is I was sacrificing my own happiness, right, trying to control something I couldn't control.
Yeah. One of the tenets that has become my tenet in life, that's the foundation of what I call soul recovery, is recognizing that we're powerless over every single thing outside of ourselves. And instead of thinking that that's negative, instead of thinking there's something wrong with that, it's almost like it empowers you to realize, like, I literally cannot control anything outside of me, but I can control how I show up. So one of the things that I teach is we tie our star to somebody else's journey. We tie how we feel to someone else. If we're powerless over every single thing outside of ourselves, but what we do is we give up our power too, because we say, if my daughter can come down and have a good day and eat the breakfast that I made and be kind to her siblings, then I can be good and I'll feel good and I'll have a happy day today. Well, you're powerless over what mood she wakes up with or how she feels about herself. But you have power about how you show up, how you interact, how you feel within yourself. And when we start taking that power back, we start realizing that we're giving everybody else permission to, this is my other famous quote that I did with my kids, pick your attitude. You get to pick your attitude, choose a good one, right? And it isn't about dismissing how you feel, but it's about recognizing that each person is responsible for their own happiness, but you have to start with yourself to be responsible for your own happiness before you can teach that to your kids.
So that quote that you heard initially, that you can only be as happy as your least happy child, that wasn't maybe an empowering quote?
I did not hear it as an empowering quote, which I think is interesting that you say that, because you have within you worked so hard to create positivity and joy and reflection in your life. At that time, our life was so hard, and my life was so hard that it helped me understand maybe why I was struggling so much, that you can only be as happy as your least happy child. And I think in everything, you can take anything in a million different directions and decide, because perception, which is my other huge soapbox that I stand on, is you get to choose how you're going to see it. Yeah. You get to choose how you're going to see it. So at that time, that was my perception. That's the best that I could do. But it got me to where I am today, which is at some point I woke up and I was like, wait a minute, I'm choosing how I'm going to be in my life based on this person that I love so much, who's on his own whole spiritual journey, who's making his own choices, who's doing whatever he's doing in life. I'm going to quit seeing him as broken. I'm going to quit seeing him as having something wrong with him, that it's my job to fix him. And I'm going to start loving him for exactly who he is, and not tying my emotions, my being okay, to whether he feels good about himself that day. And that was That was the beginning of what I call soul recovery and a massive transformation in my letting go of being a people pleaser and codependent.
I'm reading Matt Micheletti and Ashley Cutell's book right now, The Inner Work of Relationships. And as you're telling this story about your son, he said that the purpose of our lives is to have progress, And he said, we don't need to compare our progress to someone else's progress because it's irrelevant. We all come in with our unique starting point.
Mm-hmm.
And so some of us might come into this life with a starting point that's here. And then if we could progress to here, hey, that's a positive thing for this life. And then maybe someone else comes in and their starting point's here and they progress maybe not even to where we came in at. But yet it was a huge win for them to progress like that. So all this judgment that, hey, that person, should be happier, or that person should have a better disposition, or that person should be able to handle the trials of life in a better way. Should they? Is it just because maybe they came in with a different starting point than we did and we just don't know what their journey's like, or what actually is a huge success for them in this lifetime?
What I think is so amazing about where we're at right now in terms of the raising of the consciousness or the awareness that's happening. I'm 54 years old and my parents were hippies in New Mexico. And this was like in the 1968, 69, 70, they were like out there, right? And what they believed and what they thought. And they were really leaving behind what had been standard society, and this is the norm and this is what you do. And my mom discovered Buddhism early on when I was just a baby, and she was all in. And if you think about how those concepts that 54 years ago were literally so strange that you could step outside of a norm, that you could be who you wanted to be, that you could choose your own life and your own happiness, that you could be curious about your consciousness, has transformed into now they teach meditation in school. They're going to the prisons and doing meditation. They do meditation in government. It's like we're looking at a different way of being in our consciousness. And so that thing that you're talking about where people come in, I think we have more and more compassion for the soul's journey to be whatever it is. And to quit thinking there's some formula that you come in and you get married and you have kids and you have a career and you have this house and then you've made it. Well, people have made it and they're still miserable. So happiness doesn't have to do with the formula. Happiness has to do, what is that progress in your soul? What is that knowing within you that you are choosing for yourself who you are and how you're going to be in the world, and that you have permission to be sad and upset and trying to figure it out and to not know who you are, and the people around you aren't looking at you like there's something wrong with you, that you're broken. But you don't get to affect somebody else's emotions. But that's hard, especially with kids, to do that.
The wait is finally over. The Good Mood Revolution book is officially available for pre-order on Amazon today. You can go to Amazon and look for Good Mood Revolution book. And in this book, you're going to find the 8 bad moods that get in the way of your happiness. You're going to learn strategies on how to overcome each of these 8 negative thoughts. They're all lies anyway. And then what the thought patterns are that make us happy every single day. You're also going to learn strategies that can make you really feel fulfilled in your life and make other people around you feel fulfilled as well. So go on Amazon, look for Good Mood Revolution book, and order yours today. Yeah, one of my definitions of happiness is happiness equals progress. And another thing that we know is that comparison is the death of joy. And so in this time, with all the social media, comparison is at its height. We've never had more comparison, saying, does my life stack up well to everyone else's? Does this post get as many likes as other people's posts do? Am I as popular as other people are? Well, as we compare ourselves to everyone around us, we're not in our joy and we're not in our happiness. But if we do have to compare, the best way to compare is to who we used to be, is to look backwards and say, because what we do is we say, I'm not good enough now. What's interesting is to look back who we were 10 years ago and say, look how far I've come. And then to say, I'm so excited about where I'm going to be at 10 years from now. that I get to just continue to keep growing and becoming better and better and better. And we're never a finished product. So you teach this concept called detachment.
Mm-hmm.
Can you help us understand detachment?
Yeah. So we were talking before we started that I have this one episode on my podcast that has had, like a ton of views, like a lot of downloads. And it happened in my first season. And it happened because of my son, Alex, who was my hard kid. And he was really in the throes of really difficult times in his life with addiction and school and just all kinds of things. And in Al Anon, there are, it's called Detachment. And there's these 7 principles of detachment: to not do for others, to not prevent a crisis or create a crisis. And I read that bookmark and I started talking about detachment in the podcast. And that is what people resonated with. And detachment is so interesting because we think of detachment as being something that means that your heart maybe gets cold. Maybe you're detaching and you have to withdraw, and it's a negative thing. But the more that I've stepped into my spiritual practice, the more attachment resonates with so much amazing spiritual wisdom, which is around this concept of suffering. That suffering, as Buddhists talk about it, is clinging, is wanting. It's this, like, you want something to be a certain way. And detachment is not about cutting things off. It's about recognizing that clinging is causing the suffering, that the wanting the kid to be happy, that the wanting your husband or wife to behave a certain way, or wanting the world to be a certain way, that actually is what's causing your suffering. And if we're choosing to realize that we're powerless over everything outside of ourselves, the detachment is the recognition that what is happening outside of me is not mine. What's outside of me is not mine. I don't have to be attached to someone else's mood, to somebody else's life, to their choices, but it doesn't mean that you don't care. And one of the things I love about detachment is that if you can be in detachment with compassion, which means that you can hold space for people for where they're at without seeing them as broken, without seeing them as messed up, that you're actually giving them space to work on it and learn from it in their own right. And that detachment is actually a product of love. It's really allowing yourself to show up in love because you're detached from wanting it, clinging, trying to force something that isn't yours.
I love the way that you're describing this. And, my little brother didn't have things as easy as I had them. It was just harder for him to make friends and to fit in. And it just was. And I always wanted for him that it would be easier for him to make friends and to fit in. And I would kind of clung to a result that I was going to help him, that I was going to improve him. And I thought, and it was coming from a place of love. It was because I cared about him and I didn't want to see him suffer. And I knew if I was in his shoes, I would want to know what I was trying to teach him. But that's from my perspective, right? From his perspective, every time I tried to improve him, in quotations here, I was saying, I don't approve of you now.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of the things that, as I described with Harper this morning, the biggest growth I've had in my relationship with her is having full acceptance and love of her as she comes down with the dark cloud around her. Is just to love her in whatever mood she's in and to accept her in whatever mood she's in, and to not say you're not perfect enough because you didn't come down as happy as the rest of the family. It's just to let her choose the mood that she's having. Of course, I want to have some accountability in a compassionate way and say, the suffering that you're experiencing, it can stop if you choose it. But I love you if you choose it or if you don't. So in that is learning from the mistake of my little brother, where I can, but I was young. We grew up together. I was in my teens, I was in my 20s, and I'm just trying to fix him. And it finally dawned on me after all of this work that I just continue to tell him, you're not good enough.
This concept of how to interact with people has so many layers, and there's not There's not a formula that you can follow that just says, oh, this is going to work for every person, because acceptance allows us to love people for exactly who they are. You don't have to like it, right? You don't have to buy into it. But it's also interesting because especially what I've learned in this work in my own life is when you have healthy detachment and you're really allowing people to have their experience, it doesn't mean that they're given permission to vomit their crap and their energy all over everybody either. And so it's this dance that we do of really being present with ourselves and of the situation and not trying to diminish what's happening for them, but not diminishing what's happening for ourselves, and really holding it all. And so one of the things that has been helpful in my life is to like really be able to hear the other person in a way that allows them to have their experience, but doesn't allow them to be a victim. That allows us to, it isn't okay to talk poorly to your sister and make her feel bad about herself, right? And so this aspect of ourselves, like how do we show up from our whole self, seeing somebody for where they're at, loving them for where they're at, and also holding people accountable for how they're interacting with people without fixing them. And I don't actually have a magic bullet for this. It's just it's an ongoing
Isn't it
awareness that
so
I have.
complicated?
It's so complicated. So,
Yeah.
so I just, I'm still working on it, but I recognize that the more that I realize that I'm only have control of how I show up, which also means that my voice that I have of asking for what I need has to be clean and clear and open and kind, and it can have boundaries. And that's been a work in progress for me that's more successful all the time.
So I want to talk about two things with you that you've just touched on. The first is that you said earlier, detachment can sound cold. And when I first heard the concept, I felt that way too. What I've since learned is that we don't reduce our effort. We just detach from the outcome. So it's still full effort. It's still, I love my daughter so much, and I'm going to give everything I've got to help her understand her emotions and grow into an emotionally healthy adult, because that's my job as a dad. I'm not going to diminish my effort in 1 ounce. However, I'm going to detach from how it all turns out. I'm going to give full effort and no attachment to how the results turn out. And when I first heard that concept, I was like, man, that seems impossible. How can I give full effort and then not worry about how it's going to end up? And if you're hearing this for the first time, it may sound contradictory that you could give full effort and then not be attached to how the outcomes show up. I've found it through prayer. And prayer for me has allowed me to just totally be non-attached to how it's going to turn out and say, God, please guide my children, guide me, guide everyone that I encounter to the greatest possible outcome for their growth and development. And then I just let it go. And I'm like, God's got it. He's got way more than I've got. So I'm going to give everything I've got. And then I'm just going to trust God that however it turns out is how it's supposed to turn out. And sometimes someone needs a super hard fall. And that's the best thing for them. And as a parent, we don't want to see our children fall and get broken. However, when I fell and got broken, it was like one of the best things that ever happened to me. It sucked to go through, but then from that space, I was able to grow anew.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And you know what I think is so powerful about that is when we let go of the outcome, if you just are letting it go to nothing, it feels overwhelming. But when you start moving into recognizing that we are held and loved by something greater that we can't understand. And I always think of it like a river, you're on a raft in the river. And if you don't want to be in the rapids and you're fighting it, there's still rapids, and you're trying to go upstream and you're fighting and it's difficult. Well, if you recognize that spirit, source, God, whatever you call it, is rowing your boat, and if you just get a paddle and just paddle along during the difficult times and trust, there's going to be a lot less fear, a lot less stress. And we're all on our own path. So when you can open up to detachment of letting go of the outcome and trust that you are being guided down the river to what is right for you. And I think people get really caught up in what that is. I want it to look a certain way. Detachment's for ourselves too, to let go of the outcome for me. Like, who would have thought 6 years ago that I'd be an ordained metaphysical minister, have a top podcast, have this coaching business, be speaking at churches? I was an office manager at a job that I hated with a family that was a mess, right? Like, I would have never known that I was going to be here. But soul recovery is, it's a spiritual path to a happy and healthy life.
Are you looking to take your happiness to another level? If you're looking to be more successful, we need to be happier, because success and happiness go hand in hand. But sometimes we get stuck in thought patterns we don't even know are holding us back. And we need a coach or a mentor to see things we can't see with our own eyes. I've had coaches and mentors help me access levels of happiness I couldn't have achieved without them. I'm now offering that same service to a small, select number of people. If you think one-on-one coaching could elevate your happiness, go to mattoneil.com and click the coaching tab to learn more. I look forward to talking with you. I want to move to the other thing that you hit on, which was our significant other. And you had mentioned, sometimes we're with someone, sometimes I'm not feeling great, and Katie starts to take it personally, and she starts to wonder if she said something that's upset me. Or there's times when Katie's cold and standoffish, and I'm wondering, did I not do the dishes? Did I say something that has offended her? The majority of the time, it has nothing to do with either of us. But why do we take it so personal when our significant other isn't feeling on top of the world?
We are so enmeshed, sometimes not in a great way, with every energy that's around us, and especially in houses of families. There is this fabric of how we are. And for me, I think that when we look at that taking things personally, the Four Agreements is one of my favorite books, like, of all time, right? Like,
I
if
love
we
that
could
book.
all just live by, don't
Yeah.
take it personally, don't make assumptions, always do your best and be impeccable with your word, like, there'd be so good. But we are so self-centered that the assumption is your feelings must have something to do with me. And we're also self-centered in saying, for me to be okay, I need you to be okay. All of that is self-centered. And if we can just start to work on this spiritual practice, which is, can I have compassion for everybody in the situation for being exactly where they're at, that everything doesn't revolve around me, but I continue to be responsible for how I show up for myself. And as I show up for myself, then I can have more space to say, she might be upset because I didn't do the dishes. And can I let her be upset about that? Or I don't know what she's upset about. Or I may be upset about something that has to do with them or not. Can I give myself space for that? Awareness is one of the foundational pieces of moving into a spiritual practice. And Buddhism, which is my foundational spiritual upbringing and continues to be impactful for me, awareness is at the forefront of how we move into a more enlightened state. And so just noticing of where you feel those feelings, what comes up for you when that kind of bump is happening. For me, it's like I'm always trying to, like you did with your brother, right? Like, Rich will be in a space and I want to help him. And he has gotten very clear, and I've gotten very clear over these years of soul recovery, is he's like, I didn't need your help. I don't want your help. You may be a spiritual coach to all those people, but you are no spiritual coach to me. And that was hard for me because I want him to feel good. I want him to get on this train that I am. Come to this side. It feels great over here. Well, can I love him enough to let him be where he's at? Can I love him enough to let him be where he's at and not take it personally, not make assumptions, and to continue to show up in my best thing. I love what you said earlier about detachment. Doesn't mean that you don't fully show up. I'm always just trying to show up as me. And the more I trust me, the more curious I am about what that is. It continues to expand, but it's certainly not as a fixer for everybody or
Now, I do like the fixing. And Katie's read my book. She's the first reader of my book. And the book was actually dedicated to her because I couldn't have written it with the 4 children without her carrying more of the load. And it was a sacrifice for her, for sure, to give me the space to write this book. She then, there will be times when I'm not in a great mood, and she'll quote my book. And most of the time, I feel annoyed that she's using my teaching to tell me that I'm not being appropriate. And also, most of the time, after my initial frustration, I think about the lesson that she's saying and I let it sink in, and it helps alleviate whatever I'm going through. So, but this is an agreement that her and I have.
There's fixing and inspiring. There's fixing and reminding, that's the other thing about detachment is I work with a lot of people who have addiction in their lives in some way. And so it isn't that you don't help set up life for people where they could choose for themselves in something that is going to be beneficial for them. You don't just let people go and throw them out to the wolves. It's not about that. But being a healthy mirror is very different than fixing.
I like the nudges. I do. I enjoy them, and sometimes they don't work, but the majority of the time, Katie will give me a healthy nudge, and it's enough for me to become aware and then to use the teaching to get myself out of it. Sometimes, though, I'm just too tired. And this is part of the thing too, is that, I love being in a good mood, but I always allow myself the space. And I hope that if you're listening, you allow yourself the space to just be exhausted. And when I'm exhausted, I don't have the energy to be my happiest self or my best self. And I'm like, I need some rest. I'm going too hard. I love that you're bringing
that up, because I think there's also this thing where we can spiritually bypass what we actually need to be feeling. Our feelings tell us something, right? So ultimately, we're always reaching towards a good mood. We always are reaching. Some of us can't even allow ourselves to feel what we feel so that we can recognize the good mood to say, this is actually the signpost that says, go more here, right? Because we're so shut down. But our feelings tell us something. So when you don't feel good, when you're not happy, when you're being hit with something, that is actually your spiritual self giving you information about what it is to look at. But we're so shut down of looking at it. We're so afraid of opening the doors. And the truth is, the doors are these aspects of ourselves that are so rich in information. And ultimately, what our soul wants is our soul wants to learn these experiences to move into wholeness, to move into connection with God, and to be happy, to feel good.
Totally agree.
But you got to feel bad to get to feeling good.
And this is the thing, that every emotion has utility. They all have utility. I love that you call them signposts or doors into what's going on or what our soul wants us to pay attention to. I totally agree. I don't think any emotion is actually bad, even though I define them as bad moods. I think that they all have usefulness, and they're all trying to get our attention about something. Maybe it's an improper thought. Maybe it's something we actually need to look at and pay attention to. The last relationship I wanted to talk about was the relationship at work. And I know a lot of times people have struggle having happiness because there's someone at work, maybe it's their boss, maybe it's a coworker that they have to sit next to or near. And that person, their mood, the way that they treat them just brings them down. It makes everything heavy in their life. How can we be happy or our best self when we have to show up to work to provide for our family and we're around someone we just have a hard time being happy around?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I have a memory of when I worked as the office manager. The woman who was the scheduler was miserable. She was miserable, and she would yell and scream, and she would hang up on caregivers that wouldn't take the shifts that she wanted. And being an empath, it really affected my well-being. And I would have heart palpitations, and I was so stressed about going to work. And this was before I started this whole journey. But I had this like epiphany that really was seeing the sadness within her with compassion instead of the part that wanted to be like, God, if she would just like, there was some part of me that could just feel how hard it was inside of herself. And then I started doing a lot of energy work, which I didn't even realize I was doing at the time, where I would bubble up. So you can actually create a bubble of yourself, and it really works. Before you're going to walk into something that you know is going to be hard, we can choose whether we're going to let that stuff come in or not. It feels really woo-woo, but it totally works. And so
I
I
love
would
to do
see
it
it.
before I go to an airport because I don't
That's
need all of that energy. I'll
don't
put
need
a
all that
bubble around
energy.
myself.
So it's a permeable bubble, right? So you decide whether things are going to come in or not. So I would bubble up, and I'd envision myself, and we were in the same room. This was an office where there was like 5 desks in the same room. And I would envision myself in this bubble, and my computer and my desk were in the bubble. And when I started doing that, it started changing everything, because, this is before I even recognized, like, I'm powerless over how she feels about her job. I'm powerless over those of whether she's happy or not. And I just started being more and more invested in me and how I was showing up. And what I can see now that's so powerful is that if we think we're going to fix or accommodate for or make them be a certain way, here we are, and we're back in attachment. So it comes back to detaching from who they are, but really recognizing the importance of you taking care of yourself. I have a friend who works at an office where she was really struggling, and she went to to her supervisor, and she said, these coworkers, the way that they banter, the way that they talk, the loudness of what they have is really keeping me from being able to do my work well. And I would like to be requested to move to a different location. It took everything that she had to be able to go ask for that. Or I'd like to be able to work from home more. And they granted her the request. And her standing up for herself was new. And so when I asked her recently, how's work going? She's like, it's great. I now can work from home half time, and they've moved me into a different place. And that resentment that she was building about how these people bantered with each other, that really wasn't it. That really was her needing to care for herself.
I love both of the things that you said here, because we are afraid to ask for what we want because we're afraid they could say no, or we could get fired.
Mm-hmm.
Or that we're going to create an even worse situation. However, if we don't ask for what we want and we're in a miserable situation, we get to stay miserable, and that's not a way to be.
I listened to one of your podcast episodes about needs and wants, and I have a mantra now that it's like, it's okay for me to need and want more.
And we're allowed to.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's been just an absolute joy. I cannot believe that all this time has flown by. But we've talked about so much. We've talked about relationships with our children, with our spouse, with our coworkers, and with God. And this is really what life is about perfecting, or at least continuing to grow in these relationships. There are people that are like, could I possibly learn more from Rachel? Could I get into her world and maybe have her coach me, or just start to learn what she's doing, get into her inner circle? How could people reach out to you?
Yeah, thank you, Matt. And that would be how fabulous. Soul Recovery is a community, and it's a really important community to me. And we have a once a month support group where we all get together on Zoom and connect with each other. The podcast Recover Your Soul is on all platforms. I am so honored and grateful. I really feel like it's a community because we're learning how to turn our attention to ourselves, how to be okay when other people aren't okay. It's really a foundational piece of what I talk about, and how to use a spiritual path for a happy and healthy life. And so I do offer spiritual coaching as well. And I have retreats and all kinds of stuff. And my website's recoveryoursoul.net.
Well, Rachel, thank you for being here and thank you for being who you are.
Thank you, Matt. And I love that we've met, and I love the Good Mood Revolution. I have been sharing your podcast with people, and I love what you're doing. And I think you're an inspiration to really stepping into life as it is and showing up.
Well, I appreciate it so much. And y'all, thanks for listening. We will see you next week.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode with Matt O'Neill.